ladies and gentlemen, my name is Emily Sophia, and welcome to yet another review of NBC's delicious, delectable, and darkly disturbing Hannibal. So, let us dive into this craziness. I have been freaking out on multiple levels today about the show in general, as well as this episode. That was a roller coaster if I've ever been on one, okay? I was laughing, I was crying, I was half like hiding under my couch in fear and climbing the ceiling, and I was here, there, and everywhere, okay? I felt as detached from reality as Will was, so, and we also heard that there is a second season in the works at last. This show was sitting on the frightening cusp of cancellation, and I think that we Fannibles showed them who's boss. You know, I think that our collective battle cry to keep this show around, it is proven successful. So I had such a freak out moment when I officially heard the news on Twitter. I immediately just went everybody dance now mode, and I was just like, yeah. I actually screamed a little bit, you know. It was such an enormous weight off my chest just to know that we are going to get more of the show, because after Dexter ends this summer, I don't know what I'm gonna do with myself. I need another serial killer of some kind to occupy my time. I mean, what else am I gonna do? So I am very excited that this show is coming back and that there's going to be more of this. And that begs the question, you know, after how things went in this episode, how much longer can they sustain the build-up of Will's descent into insanity and maintain the secrecy about who Hannibal really is? How long can they keep this going? Because they pushed the gambit like nobody's business this episode. So spoiler alert, as we go into things, I warn you that this was quite a gruesome episode, and not just visually and physically in terms of the events and the crime scenes and things that we deal with, but emotionally, mentally, it is brutal. There was some, I could feel the wear and tear on Will's insanity in my own self, okay? So what I loved about this week's episode is that it wasn't just another crime scene a week, you know, because every episode we've had a different killer, different crime scene, you know, and we see Hannibal we see Will kind of walking back in time, you know, he's doing his voodoo witchcraft, closing his eyes, fishing, golden light, and, you know, we've kind of got the routine. And this episode was a game changer in that, you know, Will can no longer compartmentalize the experience of empathizing with the killers while knowing that he's not the one who did it, but empathizing with them to the extent that he can figure out how they did what they did, and then he cannot separate that and compartmentalize it from his own experience, from who he is. And so this week's dealings with Georgia, or George, the lady with the ridiculous skin problems and inability to recognize faces, all of those shenanigans, you know, their journeys are so strongly paralleled in this episode, which I think was extremely fascinating, and just everything that was said by Will, and just the parallelism was so rich, and I really love that, and I appreciate just how they wove that into the writing with such success. And it just blew my mind, because, you know, we see Will, he's losing a sense of self, you know, he can't decipher between what is reality, what is his dream world. He is constantly in this mess of experience. Hannibal's asking him, you know, do you feel alive? And at the same time, you know, Will is realizing that this girl who has, you know, who committed this brutal murder, she doesn't feel that she is alive, and that in killing for her is a means of attempting to feel alive, to be able to recognize faces, to be able to connect with others, because as we see at the very freaking end, I mean, after I was like awash in this beautiful touching moment of Will you know, bringing Georgia back to herself, you know, because we go from this horrifying, creepy moment of like the demon child under the bed to, you know, it's like the monster under the bed turns back into a girl, and Will just completely humanizes her, and it was so beautiful. I was actually crying like for the 2 minutes before we realized, you know, what actually happened to Dr. Sutcliffe, I believe his name is. And so I'm just all like, oh my gosh, this is just so beautiful, and I'm freaking out. And then of course, you know, cue ominous music, and we see what's really going on. And at first I had this terrifying, as the camera was panning up from the Glasgow smile cut Dr. Sutcliffe leaning over backwards, and you know, we see somebody sawing at him, and I was like, oh god, is that Will? You know, because this whole episode has had us in this place where we can't tell what Will has actually done and what he hasn't. You know, that was another crazy thing about this episode, is that we are constantly, you know, we are as besieged as Will in this case, and there is so much that is concealed from us and distorted for us, and it just made it such a ridiculous experience. Like, I couldn't decide if I wanted to keep the lights on or off, or if I wanted blankets, or if I wanted to like barricade myself, and I was just so like freaked out in so many different ways, like what? And yeah, so I don't remember exactly what my train of thought was. I'm just kind of talking about a little bit of everything. Yeah, so we find out the big twist is that it was Hannibal, and we haven't seen him in action that much this episode. You know, I actually had a sense from Hannibal's first private meeting with the doctor as they're discussing, you know, what's really going on with Will. I had a sense that the doctor just wasn't going to make it, you know. And when the doctor is talking to Hannibal about, you know, what he smells on him, as he's talking about the oh, what's it called? I looked it up here. It's the encephalitis. Encephalitis is what Hannibal says he could smell on Will from the get-go. So from that scene earlier on where he's breathing deep the sweet scent of his lover, it's more of a kind of technique of diagnosis. I don't know. Hannibal is kind of an extremely multifaceted individual, so I have much to say about him and many more questions to ask of him, which is why I'm very excited the show is continuing, because there are so many ways in which to open up his character. So, and yeah, so the doctor asks Hannibal, you know, what do you smell on me? And Hannibal says, opportunity. That was what tipped me off that this guy was gonna go. And I was also wondering, like, when the crap are we going to have, you know, the classic dinner scene after just all this insanity and the dark rooms and the anxiety. It was just like, I really have a hankering for dinner at Hannibal's. And so, you know, then we see that he's with the doctor, and whenever Hannibal is having dinner one-on-one with someone that's not Will, or, well, even Abigail, maybe, you know, they're on meh territory. It's hard to say right now. You know, I think we got Abigail and Alana are kind of in the backdrop for now. You know, this episode's very much centric on Will, his mind, where he's going, and what exactly Hannibal's trying to do with that. So, you know, Doctor and Hannibal are having a little dinner date, and you know, of course we've got to insert those little fun cannibalistic euphemisms in there, you know, as the doctor asks like where he got his little pig, you know, and Hannibal kind of deliberates like, are you talking about the person that I killed to provide you this delicious food? Oh, we're talking about my boyfriend, Will. Okay, gotcha. You know, it's like, he is quite a catch. And, you know, we're talking about Will and kind of, you know, getting in the nitty-gritty of things. When are we actually going to tell Will what's going on? Like, they seem to have this kind of, there's a sort of coalition formed between them as they're keeping the secret about what's going on with Will psychologically in order to study him further and see what exactly is going on. Because it's not something physical like a tumor, it's something far less substantial. Not less substantial in that it's not as important, but it is, you know, it's nebulous. It doesn't have a shape and a name and a definition, and they kind of just want to let, you know, are we gonna let that fire burn or put it out? You know, I love all the metaphors. As a writer myself, you know, I'm just kind of like, I gotcha. I like the writing in the show. It is quite sexy, at any rate. So, you know, they're kind of going on, and I'm like, okay, what does Hannibal really want here? What is he trying to show? Is he sort of trying to establish this friendship, this connection, this way of sort of, you know, looking into analyzing Will? And I'm just, you know, because I get the feeling that Hannibal, the people that are in his life, that he brings into his sphere of influence, it's exactly that. They're in his sphere of influence. It's not just kind of like he's surrounding himself with people because he likes it. Although, I mean, I guess you could argue for that to some extent. But, you know, he feels kind of like this master chess player, and he, you know, he dubs each person as a sort of piece, and he moves them about the board as he so chooses, and he, you know, it's like he's playing both sides of the board. He's always in constant control. He sort of has his design. You know, this week it wasn't so much about Will's design. It almost felt more about Hannibal's kind of overarching, and it's about Will trying to find himself, because he doesn't know what his design is when he can't separate himself from what he's looking at and who he is. You know, it is crazy and complex on every level. I could seriously talk about this for an hour. And just so you guys know, I always do live Twitter feeds when I watch the episodes, so be sure to check my Twitter, link in the description, if you want to see some of the little tidbits that I was tweeting as I watched the episode, and just some kind of reactions that I had, because sometimes I forget those things as I go. So I am only human, and I really don't rehearse any of this before I make these vlogs, so I just kind of roll with what I've got in my noggin, and you know, so yeah. But I was wondering, and then finally we have that painful shock of clarity as we see Hannibal, just the cool, sophisticated, infinitely classy guy, and he is just having at it on this doctor's face. And I was like, in a sense I was relieved because it wasn't Will, but then in another sense, like, okay, hello there, sir. This is the dirty side, you know. This is the death warmed over, so to speak. And then we see that little Miss George walks in on him, and of course she can't quite recognize his face. And so there's the question, you know, as she is in recovery and Jack is waiting to interview her, and etc., you know, is she going to be able to piece anything together possibly about Hannibal? Because, you know, is she going to be able to recover from this illness that has kept her from feeling alive, from connecting with faces, and has sort of kept her in this void of experience for so long? Is she going to snap out of that and, you know, start to realize who Hannibal is? Sort of like how Abigail was kind of, you know, piecing together how Hannibal was involved in everything with her father. I mean, just brick by brick. So, you know, that really, really paints him into a corner. Yeah, I mean, it's, why, this may sound like kind of a stupid question to ask, you know, in talking about this kind of a show, but why do you think that Hannibal killed the doctor? Okay, I mean, this may seem just glaringly, I guess, whatever you want to use, ridiculously obvious. But yet, you know, it's all kind of, for me, looking at the greater design that Hannibal is trying to get at. Like, what role does this guy play? Was Hannibal just kind of like, you know, sizing him up over dinner, you know, just kind of trying to contextualize this fine doctor and the place on his banquet table? Like, is it just arbitrary? Or is there a reason? Was he trying to protect Will, you know, because I felt very weird about the whole thing when Hannibal was kind of trying to help guide Will as far as what he should do and trying to get a diagnosis and etc. I just have so many questions about that scenario, and continuing to question Will's place in Hannibal's own design, you know, thinking in the context of, you know, do you let the flame burn or do we put it out? And what Hannibal basically says to the doctor over that dinner discussion is that, you know, it will be put out in due time or as it so needs, or, you know, something just as ambiguous as all get out. So, you know, that begs the question, what does that really mean? How far into insanity does Hannibal want Will to go? Does he really want him to go down that path at all? You know, because it kind of makes Will more difficult to control. Or does it? You know, it's just, it is so crazy. You've just gotta wonder what exactly Hannibal has got up his well-ironed sleeves, okay? At any rate, yeah, so, and this is just such a wild episode. It was dark and brooding, and it played out so much like a horror movie. It was really, really hard for me to watch, but, you know, as stunning as ever at the same time. I mean, frankly, I had a hard time getting up to my room after being downstairs watching it. You know, because all the lights were off as I was on my way up the stairs, so I'm like, this would be a delightful time to have eyes on the back of my head / heavy artillery, just in case there are people following me who don't have any skin. And, you know. So, what did you guys think of this episode? How much did you like it? I was extremely compelled and fascinated by it myself, you know, still trying to figure out what Hannibal's all about, how, you know, the joint fathership of Hannibal and Will is going to play out with Abigail in the future. We also see in the preview for next week that Mr. Crazy Pants from prison earlier with the whole Chesapeake Ripper scenario, you know, he gets out, and then we see Hannibal is putting Alana in his crosshairs, probably as a means of protecting himself, assuming that he somehow connects to this guy, and yada yada yada. So, you know, we're starting to see the less pretty sides of Hannibal, you know, being in the fandom, like on Tumblr and things like that. It is this creepy circus land of rainbows and unicorns and bad bromance, and it is the weirdest, most lovely place to be. But, you know, we are really starting to get into the grit of who Hannibal is, and yet it's really only the tip of the iceberg. And just what can we expect for Will in all of this? How far does Hannibal want to push him? You know, because there's also the question of, you know, is Jack pushed him too far, and yada yada yada. Does Hannibal want Jack to continue to push him? Because, you know, we see him, he's constantly confronting Jack and being like, you know, he does not just reflect what he sees, but he absorbs into himself. And so there's a side of him that seems to be protective of Will and seeking to stabilize him, but I don't know. And it's interesting, you know, because Jack's talking about how this work is sort of stabilizing for Will, but why is it stabilizing for him? Like, why would you feel stable in the constant presence of all these ridiculously brutal murders? Like, does it tickle your fancy inside? I mean, you know, it's like I can see how Jack is kind of concerned here, you know, and it'll be interesting to see just how that relationship plays out, you know, Jack and Hannibal and Will. It's just, it's so interesting that Hannibal continues to hold him so close and venerate Will for his, the extent and just profoundness of of Will's imagination and his imaginative capabilities. It's like, what is it that is really here? And this is me asking, never having read the books, and just taking what I see in the beauty of Hugh Dancy and Mads Mikkelsen and just being like, what is this? Please enlighten me, because I am just, this is the stuff that keeps me up at night. I tell you what, actually, I did have a dream the other night about Hannibal, and I was like, I was making dinner with Hannibal and Will, and it was, I don't really know. It was just kind of a good time. Like, I don't really remember. I just remember sort of hanging out with them, just having a good time. I mean, I wouldn't mind it, I guess. But at any rate, so let me know what you guys thought of this episode, what really stuck out to you, and how are you feeling about the end game? What are you anticipating, you know, as the season goes further on? And now that we're going to have more, we get to come back for seconds. Anybody? That's what I thought. The show has awakened appetites in me that I never knew I had. I'm just saying. So it is really ridiculously cool stuff. And I love, you know, it's interesting that the episode ended on a sort of note of hope for Will, which I think is good, because they have been pushing him so far to the brink of insanity this season, and that, you know, there's part of me that's like, whoa, can we pull back on the reins a little bit, you know, kind of keep the slow burning, and that sort of ties in with the metaphor of the flame of Will's imagination. But, you know, so as he is helping, you know, George come out from under his bed, and for her to realize who she is, and just that touch, just so symbolic, because like he's telling her, you know, who she is, where she is, what time it is, those constant motifs and things that Will was trying to cling on to feel alive in his own life. And so it's like he successfully brings this woman back from the brink, and you know, we'll see exactly how that goes as time progresses. But you know, so there's a sort of hope for Will. But then it's like, what is that gonna look like as the one person he can really trust, you know, is making the bodies fall all around him, and there's somebody else alive who has kind of a sense of what's going on with him, as well as arguably Abigail. So it's just like, we've got this little frame, right? This cute little frame surrounding, like, you know, little silver hearts and rhinestones, and here's Will and here's Hannibal, and they're all cute. And then the rest of the picture is just beyond the frame. You know, the frame is only like, you know, 4x6, and then there's like an 8x10 just past it. Or hell, I mean, like a whole freaking mural of everything else that is beneath the surface with Hannibal and with Will. And it's just like, when, you know, is this stuff going to seep into the picture over time? You know, what is going to become of everything and everyone? So thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any other questions, comments, things that struck you as crazy in this episode, leave them below. And if there's anything that I forgot to discuss, I actually have like an episode summary sitting in front of me here, but I wasn't really looking at it. So yeah, so just let me know. Thank you guys so much for watching. All the links you need to find other stuff that I make on my channel are below. And if you guys haven't heard my new song cover, Sweeter in History, that I did on my channel, do check it out. I had an annotation for that, and there's a link below as well. So you guys are wonderful and beautiful, and let us hash out this insanity together. I ultimately think that Will and Hannibal just need a romantic getaway, you know, and like, Hannibal can bring his meats if he so desires. I mean, as crazy as that sounds, why am I remotely okay with that? I don't know. I just, you know what's also interesting is that the only person that, like, I swear, the only person that Will has not hallucinated about or had any question of his sanity around is like is Hannibal. You know, it's almost like Hannibal is the most sane person in the show, and it's kind of a problem when you've got like this crazy pervasive serial killer as the most stable person. But I don't know, anything could happen. So thanks for watching. That is like the 27th time that I've said this, and I will be back with more next week, if not sooner. Take care, you guys.